Earlier this week, before I left for SHOT Show, I did a video on crimp jump in revolvers that are chambered in semi-automatic caliber rounds. Now, I guess I got a little bit ahead of myself because probably the most common question I got in the comment section of that video was, what the hell is crimp jump? You got to remember, a lot of my viewers don't, let's say, they ride the short bus to school. Let's just say that. And I would even go as far as to say all those windows are pretty well licked, if you know what I mean. So I'm going to have to explain first what crimp jump even is. Crimp jump is when the actual bullet comes out of the casing, when it starts to slide forward out of the casing or comes out completely. It's kind of the opposite of setback. In semi-automatic caliber guns, you got to worry about bullet setback, which could increase the pressure in the round and cause an explosion. In revolvers, it's the opposite. You got to worry about the bullet actually falling right out of the casing and possibly jamming the gun when it does. Now that we've talked about what bullet creep or crimp jump actually is, let's talk about why it happens. Now, a lot of people think it happens because revolvers recoil more sharply than semi-automatics. Well, that's not the case. Revolvers don't always recoil more than semi-automatics. Sometimes, depending on the gun, they recoil less than a semi-automatic. But you still don't have the problem of crimp jump in a semi-automatic, and you have it in revolvers, and there's a good reason for that. If you actually look down in the chamber here, you'll see that the bullet itself is not really being supported by anything. It's attached to the casing, which in turn is attached to the cylinder, either held in place by a moon clip or a rim on the cylinder, but it's not being held. The bullet itself is not being held. When the gun recoils backwards, pulling the casing along with it, the bullet itself wants to stay right where it is. The casing has to coerce it into going backwards. And sometimes the energy needed to yank it backwards actually overcomes the crimp and the bullet itself falls right out. Now that doesn't happen on rounds like this that are made for revolvers because they are crimped much more carefully and much more securely at the end here. So they're made to take that movement with the bullet being unsupported. Most semi-automatic rounds just don't have that level of crimping on them because they don't need it. You'll often notice semi-auto rounds are crimped more back here to prevent the bullet from going backwards into the casing than they are up here to keep it from falling out. And that's just because of the way semi-automatics are designed. When the rounds in a semi-automatic are in the magazine, they actually have the front of the magazine holding them in place. And they're not held firmly in the back yet, so they can shift forward when you're firing. If you ever put all your bullets in and push them all the way to the back, and then fire 1 or 2 rounds and pull your magazine out, you'll notice all your bullets have usually shifted forward due to the recoil. They could move, and they had something at the front stopping them once they moved that little bit. It stopped the bullet and the casing as one object. They did not pull separately from each other. The casing itself is not attached to the gun, so it's not being pulled back with the recoil of the gun, so it's free to move with the bullet. So that's why you just don't have that problem with a semi-automatic. It's just because of the way the bullet sits in the magazine, as opposed to the way the bullet sits in the chamber here in the cylinder. Now, one thing I will say, the chance of the bullet coming out just enough to jam the gun is very slim. If you notice, there's a lot of extra room in the front of the bullet there. So it actually has to come out enough to pretty much separate before it will even move out beyond the cylinder. If it moves out beyond the cylinder a little bit without actually falling out, it will jam the gun. Or if it falls into a place where it could jam the gun, which is very unlikely. I've never seen one actually get stuck in the spacing between the gun and the frame. But these 327s have a lot of space there, so they could. Now, the bullet actually coming out and jamming the gun is even more unlikely in guns like my Chiappa here, where the cylinder is actually the same length as a cylinder for a 38 Special or a 357 Magnum. There's a lot of room in there in front of the bullet. For that bullet to come far enough to where it would stick out, it's actually completely separated from the casing and it's likely to fall out. But it could get wedged in that cylinder and still jam your gun, just by sticking out a tiny little bit beyond the cylinder face. So it is something to worry about. Plus, you don't want your bullets just falling out on the ground before you even get to fire them, so that's not a good thing either way around. So there you have a quick explanation of what crimp jump or bullet creep actually is, and a little explanation of why it happens and what to look out for. So if you decide you want to get a revolver in a semi-automatic caliber round, I'm not telling you not to do it because there are some really great revolvers in semi-automatic caliber rounds. Just get one and make sure you test your ammo to make sure it works in that gun. There's lots of ammos out there that work really well, including Hornady. Hornady's probably the best. There are actual legitimate reasons to get a revolver in a semi-automatic caliber round. If your other guns are semi-automatic and you want to consolidate calibers, that's a reason. Or if your revolver's your backup and you want to be able to use your caliber that you use in your main carry gun, which is a semi-automatic, that's a good reason there also. And one more reason you might go to a semi-automatic round in a revolver is so that you can still shoot the superior gun, the revolver, but not blow your eardrums out like you might do with a .357 Magnum. Whatever reason you choose to go to the inferior semi-automatic round shot through the superior revolver platform, just make sure you test your ammo and make sure it works in that gun. Now, one thing I will say here, if you insist on shooting the inferior semi-automatic round, but for some reason you don't absolutely have to have a revolver, I don't know, maybe you're crazy or something and you don't realize you should have a revolver. If you don't have to have the revolver, then I would always say that you should probably shoot the inferior semi-automatic round in the inferior semi-automatic platform and leave the revolvers for the big boys. You ain't even my real dad.